Why don't we talk about something else? This is another one of the controversy people talk about. That is, people say that you don't really need high SPF study. Excuse me, you don't really need high SPF sunscreen, right? And because I know you did a lot of those work on the beach, on the ski slopes, and tell us a little bit about your study and tell us about your preference using high SPF, low SPF, and that controversy.
Sure. I mean, as you know, the FDA is talking about, and they've gone back and forth a little bit, but it looks like they're going to be putting a cap of 60 plus
Yeah.
on sunscreens. I am opposed to that for a variety of reasons and just practical reasons. One is there's an advantage to the higher SPFs in using them. And the reason is that SPF is tested, is rated when people apply 2 milligrams per square centimeter to their body of sunscreen. If most people would do that, they'd be as white as your lab coat, Steve. Well, so people under apply sunscreen. They really do. And they apply typically 25 to 50% of the rated amount. Now, what that means is if you're applying a SPF 50, or let's make it SPF 60, which is a 60 plus now, if you're applying 50% of the rated amount, you're only getting a 30. Applying 25% of the rated amount, you're only getting a 15 effectively, or something close to that. So the higher SPFs are more forgiving in real world environments. That's number one. The second thing that's really important about this is that with the higher SPFs, you're really getting in some ways better coverage in the real world settings. So what I mean by that is we did two ski studies where we had people do what's called a split face study, where in other words, you put one sunscreen on one side of your face, the other sunscreen on the other side of your face, and some people had left, right, and some people had them flipped right, left. And so we wanted to see, were you more likely to sunburn? You were allowed to reapply sunscreen when you wanted to. We did the original study with a small number of people with SPF 50 versus 85, and the SPF 50 people burned more.
Did you say 50 versus 85?
Right, and the
Wow.
50 actually, because in real world, this was in skiing, so very high intensity UV, right? But we then did a larger study with 200 subjects, and we looked at SPF 50 versus SPF 100. Now, we did this in March in Vail, Colorado, which is at over 8,000 feet at the base and 11,000 feet at the top. So that's sunnier than it would be at the beach in June in New York. It's a very strong UV. We had people apply, they didn't know what they were applying. The two tubes were just not marked, and just A and B, so they knew you right or left to use. And we had them apply the sunscreen. We had them come back and evaluate for sunburn. And it turned out the SPF 50 side was 11 times more likely to sunburn than the SPF 100 side.
That's kind of amazing because you think 50 is pretty high already, right? And in that environment, and they still get burned.
Well, that's the thing. So we broke it down in a bunch of ways. We weighed the tubes of sunscreen to see did they use the 100 more than 50. They weighed the same. It didn't matter. We also looked at the different skin types from very light to darker skin. Didn't matter. The 50 side burnt more. We looked at number of did people reapply the 50 or the 100 more often. Didn't make a difference. It was the same. Went through all these different things. Now, again, this is a very high ultraviolet environment.
Sure.
It's more than just going to I don't know, going out and walking out in September or something somewhere. But still, it really made a difference. And the feeling was, again, because people under apply. So some of them who were putting the 50 maybe are under applying, and just getting the effects of a 15 or a 20 in that environment, which probably is not enough. We did another study that we had published also a couple of years ago, comparing sunscreen to shade. And that was published in JAMA Derm. And the idea behind that, we had people who were in a beach umbrella, and they were actually under an umbrella that had a effective protection of equivalent of an SPF of 1,000. So it was pretty blocking, versus using sunscreen. People don't realize when you're in the shade under an umbrella, there's still some UV that gets in because the rays don't come down straight. They bounce off dust in the air and everything with it. So they may not come down vertically, they come at an angle. So it's obviously not pitch black under the umbrella, right? Some light's getting through from that the same way some UV gets through. So it turned out actually the umbrella people got more sunburning and more tanning and sunburning darker than did those who had the sunscreen on that round. It was SPF 100 sunscreen outside. And then we did a similar study that I was only tangentially involved, but Henry Lim did the primary work with this, with 5 days of beachgoers. And it turned out, in fact, that same thing, that you were much more likely to sunburn with a 50 than the 100. So, it's just clearly the higher SPF sunscreens are more forgiving. So that's a second reason for it. The third reason I'm opposed to the cap is just a practical one, and that if we really put this cap of SPF 60 plus on, there will be no incentive for a sunscreen manufacturer to make a better sunscreen because they won't get credit for it. So to me, this will impede research in better sunscreens, and that's probably what bothers me the most.
Yeah, great summary. Before we get to the last controversies, I want to touch upon one more thing. When we talk about photo protection, we all advocate for the comprehensive approach, that is sun avoidance, seeking shade, clothing, and very last, using sunscreen. And people should just remember that we talked a lot about sunscreen because there's a lot of controversy associated with it.